There's more college football realignment chaos currently happening, and Utah and the Big 12 could very much so be involved in it. But would that be a good thing for Utah and the Big 12? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes and Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes or Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to either of our shows, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you guys in the YouTube comments as well as on social media. You can follow my show at Locked On Utes or head over to Locked On Big 12 to give Drake a follow over there. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by Drake Toll, the host of Locked On Big 12, to talk about something that's been all the rage in college athletics for the past few years now. Drake, is conference realignment. And look, there's a lot of stuff going on, flying around about Clemson, Florida State, because of them suing the ACC, trying to get out of it, trying to bolt for another conference. So the conversation of realignment has kind of scooped up again because and maybe there's some crazy world where the Big 12 would scoop a Clemson or Florida State. That doesn't seem as likely, though. They're more than likely probably going to end up in the Big 10 or the SEC. But whatever happens, what if the rest of the SEC or the ACC was to implode? That's where I think it could get really interested of which schools would then maybe end up in the Big 12, because the goal for, if we did see the ACC implode, no one wants to be, and I'm sorry to say this, but no one wants to be Oregon State and Washington State. So that's why I think expansion gets really interesting. But as for, is it a good thing? I'm going to always say yes, because I do think that it gives the conference more strength. If you're not going to expand just for the sake of expanding, you're going to add quality teams like a North Carolina or whoever. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking,
wait. Let me pause you there. The ACC did expand for the sake of expanding by adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU, which there were some contract things. The reason they did that was so they didn't have enough teams to vote their way out of the ACC, and they could also keep a TV contract. But let me add in there are ways to add teams that don't necessarily bring you exponential revenue. Continue. Sorry, JT.
That's true. It's true. And that's a good point. I think I was looking at it, for why I would be down for it for Utah is if you're adding teams that have just bigger brand power. I mentioned North Carolina or some of these other ones that are in there. I think it makes you stronger. If it's like, oh, you got a North Carolina win on your resume, I think that's a great thing. So that's where I am going to be for expansion, because while the Big 12 and the SEC, or excuse me, the Big 10 and SEC are going to continue to load up, in that way, realignment is becoming an arms race. The Big 12 should want to get as strong too. And the stronger the conference is, the stronger Utah would be then too.
I think so. That is a way to look at expansion from a Big 12 point of view. As a Big 12 analyst, and if you are a fan of a team in the Big 12, you should like expansion because of what it has brought this conference and what it will continue to bring this conference. Now, look, I get it. Oklahoma State and Oklahoma aren't going to play anymore. Texas Tech and Texas aren't going to play anymore. You're going to lose some of those foundational rivalries, but you already didn't like those guys anyway, and those fan bases were insufferable to begin with. And if we're really honest with ourselves, those teams, the other teams that aren't Texas and Oklahoma, didn't win as much historically as Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12. So you get rid of those two brands. And now what you do is you've created with Utah and Arizona State and Colorado, this brand new Big 12 Western look. And if you're a Utah fan specifically, or BYU or Colorado, it might sound odd that this league is looking east, but I can tell you this, for West Virginia fans, for UCF fans, Cincinnati, even if we go to Iowa State, those guys have been waiting for something to happen out east. West Virginia fans don't have a single game they can drive to in conference play. So as we've talked about how regionality has gone to the wayside in expansion, West Virginia's been suffering that for over a decade now. They're the ones that you get to complain about that. So from a Big 12 standpoint, I think it's nothing but good if we're talking about a Louisville, a Pitt, if we're lucky, a Miami or a UNC or Virginia in this conference. And if you're Dennis Dodd's emergency plan that he included in an article a couple of weeks ago, Florida State and Clemson are somehow in the conversation too.
Yeah, and that would be a huge game changer to add programs like that. And I do think it makes some sense if you are Clemson or Florida State to want to do that, because you would look at yourselves and go, we are the premier brands in the Big 12. You know, that's how they would perceive themselves if they join the conference. So that's where maybe they have a chance
and
to add those.
they would be correct. They would be correct.
Yes,
That is those two brands would replace what Texas and Oklahoma were. And I'll throw in a caveat here, because somebody is screaming at their Bluetooth speaker or phone or car right now saying, there's no way those two teams ever go. The only emergency scenario in which those two squads are left to the Big 12 is where ESPN relegates them there or places them in the conference. Make no mistake, it is the TV deals, the TV companies that pick and play what these schools do, because that's where the money is, and money certainly talks.
It does. And to your point also about the fan who was maybe screaming at us about that, I think they also would have said, as all of us probably said 10 years ago, Texas and Oklahoma aren't going to leave the Big 12 for the SEC. Yeah. And now the Big 10 has the four prominent Pac-12 schools. It's just the crazy state of conference realignment, and things rapidly change quickly. I mean, Drake, I'll ask you, how soon do you think it does feel like, I know the contract seems pretty stiff. I think Clemson and Florida State are going to find a way out of it. How close do you think we are to seeing some form of the next big conference realignment shakeup?
I'll tell you this. I'm not talking to the attorneys that are inside the court battles between Clemson, Florida State, and the ACC.
No, you're talking to actually, Drake, you're talking to John Cena. So
those guys are living on. But those entities, the attorneys I don't need those sources, because so much of this has become public recently. And what has become public is the lawsuit itself. Why Florida State, why Clemson are suing. And the big thing that I circle is a date in the grant of rights that is buried in 2025, where ESPN can decide that, hey, after 2027, we're cutting off the ACC. We don't want anything to do with that conference. Originally, these schools were all under the impression they had a TV contract through 2036. When they broke out that sealed grant of rights, it said the opposite, that for those 9 years between 2027 and 2036, nothing is guaranteed, and ESPN in 2025 can opt out as early as that 2027 year. The only other this is a complete expedition of the process, is right now, Cal, Stanford, and SMU are not members of the ACC. They haven't officially joined that conference yet. If from a legal standpoint, Florida State can win their way out of this conference before June 30th, pay their way, if there is some way, and it's not impossible. Every time we say the word impossible in expansion, it's a misnomer. It is not impossible for these two schools to have completely exited that league by June 30th. And as we know, that those three teams they added backfilled the conference so that ESPN couldn't renegotiate a contract if a couple teams left. Well, if those three teams aren't in your conference and teams start leaving, then ESPN has the leeway to just say, you know what, we're done with your league. And JT, the fastest this could happen is by June 30th of this year, where ACC schools decide we want out, we'll play independent for a year, then go from there.
It's amazing the timeline of all of this. Let's just look back a year ago, when San Diego State was going to become a member of the Pac-12.
Yeah, when Utah was a Pac-12 team a year ago?
Exactly. Even when Utah was a Pac-12 team a year ago. But even like the time, like we're like, oh, San Diego State's going to join the conference. There was rumors about it always falling apart still, but you still felt like, oh, they'll make it. And then no, they did not. And now we're here in the Big 12.
Think about this too. And this is not as tight of a timeline, obviously, but One year ago, Utah was in the Pac-12, and even when it was announced they would be moving to the Big 12, it wasn't a couple years down the line they're going to do that. When it was BYU and Cincinnati, it was, hey, in 2023, we're going to integrate these teams. This was Utah's going to be in the Big 12 next football season. We're about to do this. So there really is no such thing as a set timeline anymore. These things can happen almost overnight.
As Mark Harlan literally stood on the stage with Commissioner Kliakoff 2 weeks before he then announced the conference is going there too. So absolute insanity, and it's going to be crazy to see what the next few months of conference realignment do end up holding overall. But so that's what we feel about expansion. But then the question is the Big 12 and then Utah by association in danger of falling behind because of some of the shakeups to the college football playoff, with the Big 10 and SEC continuing to try to make changes to that format that benefit those conferences? That's what we're going to be diving into in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Big 12. It's our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA, Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. You can get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. Now, for some stuff that you guys need to know about, don't forget to go over to Robinhood. Financial LLC member, is registered broker dealer. Robinhood IRA available for U.S. customers in good standing. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. Investing involves risk, including losses, and a 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for a 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. So make sure you guys head over to Robinhood today. Drake, when looking at how all of this is shaking out with the college football playoff and the reports of even further changing the format to soon a 14 team, there's been things floated around as much as auto bids 3 per conference, not 1. So it's like, what are we even playing a conference championship game for? We're going to do 3. It feels to me like the SEC and Big Ten are just trying to continue to separate themselves for the Big 12. And that is where it concerns me about this conference, is that all the power does seem to be in the hands of the SEC and the Big Ten currently.
For sure. That is the case with the College Football Playoff Committee. It's been the case in expansion, going back to Texas and Oklahoma, leaving for the SEC, and the Big Ten getting brands such as Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC. And the revenue distribution, especially the College Football Playoff, shows you just how far behind the Big 12 is, because the SEC and Big Ten are slated to make almost twice as much as our conference moving forward, and that's not good. So the question then becomes, how do you remedy that? What can the Big 12 do to stay relevant? And key one, this is the reason we have the conversation so often about the ACC, is because key number one to the Big 12 thriving, and not just thriving, but honestly staying alive in an era of college football that is so money-centric and is moving toward the Big 10 and the SEC, is to take ACC squads. If Miami and Clemson and Florida State and UNC and Virginia all land in the SEC or the Big Ten, because we already think that Florida State and Clemson are going to do so. If all those entities are gone from the Big 12's grasp, nothing shrunk. There was no gap that was taken away. The Big 12 is even further behind where the 2 mega conferences are. And in that event, it's the equivalent of what the Big 12 was compared to the Sun Belt. Well, now you're just the Sun Belt compared to the SEC. And that is not what this conference wants moving forward, because at some point, your most valuable entities in any given year, it could be a Utah, it could be a TCU. It's typically the teams that win on a consistent level, especially public state schools. When that squad starts taking wins and winning 10 games a year and they become a valuable brand, someone's going to scoop them up. I make this case all the time. I will make it on every show that I have the opportunity to do so. 15 years ago, Clemson was behind Bowling Green in football revenue. Why? Because they didn't win. No one cared. They didn't have a brand. They spent a decade winning national championships and going to the college football playoff, and that's what created them as a power in this sport. If Utah spends the next decade winning 2 national championships and going to multiple college football playoffs, you would love that. And the SEC and Big Ten would love that. The college football playoff would award that with money. And that's what everybody wants. So the Big 12 steps to staying relevant and closing that gap. Take the ACC teams you can get that make you more valuable. Sorry, Boston College and Syracuse and Wake Forest. That is not you. But an NC State, a Louisville, a Virginia, a Miami, each have a respective value within their own right that makes the Big 12 even better. Take those and start winning championships, start winning in the playoff, and then the Big 12 closes that gap. Because right now, ESPN and the Big 12 are happy with one another. We got to keep that going too.
You have to keep it going. And what's nice is I do think this year is an opportunity where they will continue to be happy for each other. I expect Utah to be one of the best teams. I think Oklahoma State's still going to be very good this coming season. I think I've said before, I think Colorado will be good this year. I don't know how good. I think they will be better, though. They're going to dry eyeballs because it's Deion Sanders, too. So all of those things have a lot of value getting in on those games in action. And you mentioned it. wherever Miami goes. Because I still believe eventually Miami will be back. Will they be a national contender? I mean, they should be eventually, but who knows? They'll get to that point. But you can get a sleeping giant like that. I mean, that's what SMU's not a sleeping giant anymore, but there was a lot of value. And I felt like in adding an SMU for a while, just because of the potential of having access to the Dallas area like that. So there's still potential to be excitement in there. And there's a lot of fun brand and opportunities to see if you get matched up with. I mean, the thought of a Utah playing a Miami, the fight for who has the real U. Utah does this one, Miami does this one. Like just little stupid things like that we love about college sports. Like that would make me exciting. But what doesn't make me exciting, and this isn't even have as much to do with this topic as it pertains to the Big 12 stuff, but I just think it's really disappointing that we could move to such a non-competitive standpoint that we'd give 3 auto bids and completely devalue a conference championship game. I just think that idea is ludicrous, Drake.
Yeah, from that point of view, when we start talking about teams that have access to a playoff that are judged by what conference you're in, then the gap goes from a gap to a chasm, and at that point, you're beyond. I mean, there's nothing else you can do. So the single auto bid for your league is something that I'm a proponent of. Obviously, being a Big 12 guy, and my whole deal, it's Brett Yormark's same thing. Is hey, give this a few years, and when we reevaluate with this, there's this look-in clause the college football playoff added that says in a few years, we'll look and see how every conference has expanded, how you've done a realignment, and then we'll reallot how we do this process from a revenue standpoint and likely from who gets in and what auto bid format. So now, again, it all goes back to expansion. Again, the Big 12 poach this or poach that, because I get it, JT. It's a stupid idea to me, too. A team getting 3 auto bids, just it doesn't register in my brain. But if it was the Big 12 getting it, I probably wouldn't be near as upset. I'm trying to hold off as long as I can and wait for the Big 12 to scoop up ACC squads so they can get a fair spot at the table.
You're right in terms of, look, if they're going to get auto bids, then everyone should get auto bids. I have a hard time believing they would agree to that because they want to keep all the power in that situation. Yeah. But you're right. If they were able to do that, that would make it better too. And I'm someone who looks forward to conference championship weekend. So I think that's where the bummer of that would be as well. But the nice thing is the Big 12 will continue to have that too. I'm interested to see how much viewership wise, maybe the Big 12 can, if the SEC and the Big 10, they have the biggest brands, obviously. I wonder if at all just like this villain perception that they could develop if they are responsible for the downfall of the sport like that. I wonder if just some people would tune out of their games. I don't think they would that drastically, but it is kind of just an interesting thought. Like if they were the ones responsible for, would people stop supporting them a little bit? But it probably is more so to the thing of like we've seen in the past, people do certain things and they say, I'm never going to watch again. And then they still end up watching them. It's still something to wonder about just how these actions and the fact that those two conferences could destroy the foundation of a sport we love. In some ways, it's already crumbled a little bit, but still holding its balance. It's just, once again, it's just wild to be talking about all the various things we've already touched on here, Drake. All this stuff seems like it should be a dream and a fantasy. And instead, in a lot of ways, it could be a near reality.
JT, you're on Locked On Big 12 right now. Like a year ago, it wasn't a thing.
That's true.
A year ago, there was no reason for you to be on this show.
That's a good point.
That is the reality we're in.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's a strange one, and it'll be interesting to see. And, you mentioned some interesting things there, Drake, about how we've been talking a lot about football, right? Yeah. But one thing that would be fascinating is adding Miami basketball. They just made a Final Four run last year. Don't ask how they did this year. This year wasn't very good. But last year, crazy things. NC State currently in the Final Four. Shout out DJ Burns. He's a legend. How about another one? Now, this would be an interesting where their brand would kind of add up because football, they're not great, but basketball, they are the brand. How about a Duke? You want to add Duke to the Big 12? Already the best basketball conference, at least as it relates to the regular season. I don't have a Final Four team in right now. That could be crazy because speaking of the Big 12 not having a Final Four, and we got to talk about if Big 12 basketball is overrated. Utah is going to be heading there. Hey, technically, Utah was the last Big 12 team remaining.
Stop. Next. Next.
Shout out the NIT. Shout out the NIT. But we are going to be talking about if the Big 12 was overrated in basketball and just in general because it's another year in which they weren't able to crack the Final Four. That we will be diving into in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you all about our friends at Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. You can pick out any specific game or matchup you'd love to attend, and there are so many fantastic ones out there and so many great features about the Gametime app, whether it's those last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. My personal favorite's the view from your seat. It allows you to know exactly what kind of a vantage point you'll be sitting in, so you know what kind of a deal you'll be getting. They also have their low price guarantee. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find seats for tickets, what I think is fantastic. Your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry, and you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, comedy, theater, events near you, and so much more. So make sure you guys take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEG with a capital L of locked, capital O and O, and capital C in college for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Drake, the Big 12 had a really strong regular season, but it did not go to the fruition how they'd hoped in the tournament. Unfortunately, Houston dealt with that injury and weren't able to keep the momentum that they'd hoped that they
Were you happy?
Let's
just cut to the chase here. Were you happy when BYU lost? When you saw that? When you saw them lose to Duquesne in game 2?
Yes, but I also used to live in Akron, so I was very happy for Keith Dambrot and Duquesne. So it does go in two folds. Don't think it's all complete BYU hate. Shout out Keith Dambrot. I did want to see them get it done too, but I was happy. It's BYU.
I get it. You know, like if your team didn't make the tournament, but your rival just lost to Duquesne, you can still laugh. I will give that to you.
Yep. Yeah, it was not the most joyous end of the season for Utah men's basketball. Even though they were still going in the NIT by the time we're recording this, they did lose to Indiana State. But it does pose the question, Drake, because the Big 12 underperformed in the tournament. Is Big 12 basketball overrated?
No. Big 12 basketball is not overrated because the analytics are so strong with the conference. The numbers back it up. This isn't I think the Big 12 is the best conference in college basketball. You could argue the Mountain West was flirting with 5 or 6 teams that could have gotten into March, and the ACC wasn't, and the Pac-12 wasn't. There are conferences who had such a bad regular season who actually showed up in the postseason. The Big 12 wasn't one of those. They were the opposite, but the analytics, the numbers would tell you this conference is the best conference in America. There were 10 teams in the top 40 at shot quality. Same goes for KenPom and Net. The metrics love the league, but because it was a league that had teams consistently in the top 25 and consistent. I think almost every Big 12 team spent at least a moment of this season thinking, hey, wait a second, we might make it to March. 12 of the 14 at the very least did. And that says a lot about the league. And what happens is you get to March and things are almost a coin flip. There's a reason, JT. This is a wild way to put this, but I need you to bear with me here. Most years, you have that random Florida Gulf Coast or a Yale or a St. Peter's
NC State
or an FDU or NC State. And at some point, almost always, that team reaches the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 and gets blown out by somebody else because the luck runs out. The coin stops flipping in their direction. It's parity. All over the entire. It's impossible to judge a conference in a single elimination format. It's not even just the matchups. Like, oh, well, your league didn't match up well against the Big East. No, it's not that. Don't even dig that deep. Just dig in the fact that sometimes a very far inferior team wins in March. St. Peter's was not better than Kentucky. Their win against Kentucky doesn't make the SEC an awful basketball conference. Doesn't make them the equivalent of the SoCon or whatever St. Peter's is in. It's a single elimination, parity-filled format. And in that case, I don't think you can judge the strength of a conference because it truly is where the coin flips in so many of these matchups.
You're absolutely right. I mean, NC State, if a free throw is made and a 3 doesn't get banked in, their coach is probably fired. And they're nowhere near the position that they're currently in the Final Four, which is insanity. And also, look, I know a member of the committee. I've interviewed him on my own show. I call him Dad. So I know I've talked with him and interviewed him on the show, as I mentioned, about how this process works. And of course, you're just going to go on what this year has done and what the data says, because you can't be like, well, do we really want to seed a Baylor this high when they haven't made it back in a while. Like, that's not how this works. All you can judge them is based on what they did this year. And all of those Big 12 teams, because the Big 12 was a regular season gauntlet. And I feel bad. Like, we mentioned Houston, and there are a couple other teams too, Drake, that they dealt with some bad injury luck as well. And the tournament is just such a wild and crazy conundrum whenever it does occur. So it's just one of those things where it wasn't the Big 12's year for sure, but you can't say it was overrated, because in the regular season, they were fantastic. It just wasn't their day on some of those nights. They didn't have it on those days, and that's unfortunate for them, but I totally agree. Can't call it overrated.
No, you can't. And you look at a Houston losing Jamal Shead in that game. Obviously, I wouldn't make the case that Houston does win, but it's likely,
Yeah,
it's
Kansas
possible.
Lost one of their guys too. I just blanked on
Kansas. Hunter Dickinson is not 100%, and Kevin McCullough doesn't play. Yep. And it just, in the end, they're relying on guys who had a hell of a win against Stanford and just didn't have it in the tank, especially in the second half of their round 2 game against Gonzaga. So, I'm pointing at conference contenders in Kansas and Houston who have been to Final Fours, or a Baylor too who lost Langston Love. And those schools just got dealt a tough blow. Yeah. They weren't ready for March when March rolled around, and March waits for no one. So the way that I view it is yes, you got unlucky, but even again, I think I take away the luck thing, and I take away the this team from this conference matches up poorly with that team. I take all that away to, at its base level, say March Madness is just madness. There is no rhyme or reason to what happens.
Yep, it's always crazy. And as you said, the Big 12 got unlucky. But us here at Locked On Utes, we got lucky because we got to talk to you today, Drake. Appreciate you making the time to hop on. And I know we're doing this as a crossover. So all you guys, you know where to follow Drake at. But if you're Locked On Utes normally, make sure you guys head over to Locked On Big 12. Check out everything Drake has going on over there. And ditto for Locked On Utes. Drake, always fun doing these with you.
JT, go Utes.
Go Utes. There we go. I'm clipping that. I'm going to use it. Hey, there we go. Oh, that's definitely getting saved. You shouldn't have done that. That's definitely getting saved. People will say it's fake. People will say it's Photoshop too, based on comments you've made in the past.
But I still love Cougar Tails.
Hey, Cougar Tails. I've actually never tried one, so maybe I'll have to someday. But don't do it. Okay,
it's a rivalry.
Good point. I'll hold strong. That's going to do it for Locked On Utes and Locked On Big 12. We'll be coming at you guys soon with more great content. Thank you guys for listening to our show today, and we'll be back with you shortly.